Welcome back to the Panther Business Briefing. I'm your host, Jason Reed, and in this special episode, we've put together a compilation of some of the most memorable moments from our past conversations. Here, we highlight key insights from our closing segments where we asked each guest to spotlight an aspect of their field that's not getting the attention it deserves, or to reflect on the biggest lessons from our discussion. Whether it's energy, housing, AI, or modern healthcare, these moments capture the most thought-provoking and impactful ideas we've covered so far. Up first, we're going back to our inaugural episode with Dr. Ali Parashgari, a professor at finance here at FIU. In this conversation, Dr. Parashgari draws from decades of research on global energy markets to stress the importance of looking at energy, environmental impact, and technological innovation together and not in isolation. Here, he shows some eye-opening findings from a recently released 12-year study showing that while environmental risks tend to weigh negatively on a firm's performance, investments in technological advancements often have an even greater positive impact. His takeaway was that the future of energy demands an integrated approach, where environment and tech development go hand in hand. And he warns that failing to view them together risks keeping us locked in circular debates with no real progress. Let's listen back.
The last question that we wanted to ask, and it's a very broad one, so take it any way you want. We'd like to know if there's an aspect in all your years of looking at the market, if there's a particular aspect related to oil and gas that you think is of great importance that is really just not getting the attention that it deserves.
I may say that if you look at historical progression of all the energy sectors, today increasingly environmental factors,
right,
and say ESG and things to that effect, or whether you like it or not with us, and whether this administration or the next administration would like to pay attention to them, they are with us. And we cannot really ignore them. And then the relation of environment and technological development, the two together, in my opinion, deserves a lot of more attention.
Sure.
Because, as I mentioned earlier, these two run counter to each other. A colleague of mine and I did a study not that long ago, and we put the effect of environment and technological development against some measures of firms, 10 variables, for example. Mm-hmm. We consider 10 variables. We say, okay, you are a firm.
From more of a cost perspective or from earnings?
Right. I mean, the performance, for example, the amount of your investment, your profitability,
right,
et cetera, et cetera. 10 financial measures of the firm. We put it against two main factors, technological development and environmental factors. And the question was, how do you react? How do you react? Our findings was that technology was equally important and even sometimes more important. So if you were the CEO of a company and you were faced with these two dimensions, do I pay attention to environment, or am I hoping that technological development is going to solve my problem? You gave priority to the technological development. Mm-hmm. The effect of technological development was highly positive, statistically significant as we academically interpreted some of those results. The effect of climate risk was significantly negative, again, statistically significantly negative. But then when we interacted both of them together, the technology was the winner.
Started to weigh heavier, right?
It had a heavier weight. And so therefore, I was personally surprised because I thought that we are one way looking at one rod, and the other one was sort of in the air. We didn't know what's going to happen. But then that's how the firms are reacting. It's not what I am thinking. It is what, say, 30,000 firms that are surrounding us are. What's the state of their mind right now?
What was the time frame on that study?
The time frame of the study was about 12 years, 12 years.
Right.
It is coming out in a journal. It may be already published. It's accepted for publication. It may come out. But I just share with you the outcome. So in terms of what I think may be a good topic to evaluate, because if there is a solution for a problem that we have on our desk and the solution is not really looked into carefully, I think it is good to do that because God knows where we may be headed,
For sure.
So therefore, I may say that the combination of energy, environment, and technology, these three factors are not separated from one another. I mean, anybody who wants to look at anything has to look at these three factors simultaneously. Otherwise, we will have a lot of controversial comments here and there. We don't agree with one another.
That's the
And
it's the
everybody
evidence
is
that
right.
matters. Yeah.
And everybody is right, but we don't agree with one another. Okay.
I had I'm trying to find it. I had something from Ibis World. It was a sort of an industry report, and it talked about some of the biggest technological innovations that tied into slowing down the climate change or the impact on the ozone layer. And it was I guess it's carbon recycling. I didn't exactly understand.
There are a few, not a few, there are a handful of recycling efforts. Sweden, Norway, and a few European nations are pioneering in it, large scale, to see what they can do.
Right.
But then some also making jokes about that. By making jokes about that, they say that, you know what, in order to capture all these carbons from the air, from the atmosphere, we will have to accumulate as much as 1,000 Egyptian pyramids in terms of size. But then where do we put them? I mean, this is a joke, of course, but there is somebody talking about that. The estimate is that there is so much. If we want to go, say, to 30 years ago, let's say, okay, if we want to capture all the CO2s that were created during the last, say, 30 years, what could it look like? Think of those pyramids and multiply by 1,000.
Yeah, it's not just planting more trees and they'll just
so
therefore through that, right?
Therefore back to the example that I mentioned about carbon capturing, but they are good. They are really good scenarios. I mean, I don't really buy that pyramid comparison because the capturing could include a space, and if they are captured in a space, then things could be very different, right?
That was Dr. Ali Parajgari closing out our inaugural episode by underscoring the critical and often overlooked intersection of energy, environment, and technology, and why firms today are betting on innovation to navigate that tension. Up next, we're revisiting our conversation with Dr. Mario Loyola, who also used his closing segment to highlight a major issue flying under the radar. In this case, he unpacks the hidden dangers lurking in America's electricity markets, explaining why policy decisions made in the prior 4 years are setting the stage for serious energy supply challenges in the near future.
Let me say that the U.S. right now is facing a major energy scarcity crisis because it has gone down somewhat similar road to Europe, and energy prices have already risen 30% since the beginning of the Biden administration. PJM, which is the regional transmission organization that provides electricity to like Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, those Midwestern, those Mid-Atlantic states, just had a capacity auction in which prices soared by 1,000%. That's capacity auction is how much it costs to get people to producers to promise to provide electricity to you next year, right? So it's like a component of your electricity bill. And what we're seeing is just red flags going up all over the place that the grid has suddenly hit severe constraints on its ability to expand. One of them is the Inflation Reduction Act, which is causing all of this free solar electricity to be dumped on the grid in the middle of the day across many parts of the country. as a result of which baseload generation, coal, natural gas, even nuclear, cannot recoup their costs. So the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies for solar have frozen investment in new baseload capacity in most parts of the United States, not in Florida for a reason I'll explain in a second. And that's very serious because this is at the same time as electric grid operators are prognosticating the most rapid increase in demand that we've had in 100 years from electric vehicles, from AI, data centers. They're expecting demand to grow by 15% at least in the next 10 years, while coal plants retiring and stuff, the grid is going to contract by 15% in the next 10 years. So we're facing a gap of 30% of grid capacity over the next 10 years, which is we're not going to get anywhere near that because electricity prices are going to start going through the roof if there's even a gap of 5%. And so what are we going to do about that? Don't know. But if you look across the country right now, you see, 30 years ago, residential electricity prices were basically the same everywhere. Now there's been a huge divergence. California pays more than twice as much for every unit of electricity as Florida. There's a lot of divergence across the country, and the pattern is very clear. It's those states that have adopted renewable portfolio standards, clean electricity standards. The states that have, the really strong correlation actually is whether your legislature and governor are Democrat or Republican. If your legislature and governor are Democrats, your electricity is twice as expensive as if they're Republican. And that's somewhat a function of higher income in those states, but it also explains the fact that you've got, that people in, Florida is not a low-income state, and it still has a very cheap electricity below the national average and far below California. And the reason is that they've avoided a lot of these in Florida, they have avoided a lot of these gimmicky, clean kinds of incentives. Yeah. And there's another thing which is very interesting. It's very complicated. It's taken me a while to understand it. But in most of the country, you have what are called regional transmission organizations, which, unlike vertically integrated electrical utilities, just go out into the market and anybody can be an electricity producer, if you've got a plant up and running, and they have to take whatever electricity is being offered at whatever time of the day that is cheapest from whoever's producing it. Mm. This was supposed to be this was a Clinton era reform.
Yeah, I remember something like distributing your unused energy sort of thing, or contributing it to
right. And this was supposed to be like a smart grid thing. But it's turned out that which was a major innovation of the Clinton administration, Florida and the western states outside of California are the two areas of the country that still have vertically integrated utilities. And the major difference that we're going to see over the next decade is that like I said, the interplay of the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies with the market structure of a regional transmission organization is absolutely toxic. Mm-hmm. Because what is happening is that it's hitting the one part of the RTO system that is actually market-based is when they have to buy electricity. And the IRA is coming in and is subsidizing all of these renewable guys to dump it on the market for free or even for negative prices. Because the solar developers are making their money from the government subsidies. They're not making the money from the market. Mm-hmm. So they're coming in, and now all the actual, baseload electricity produced, which are not the variable, baseload means that it can operate consistently, right, across all day long, 24/7, all year long, as opposed to solar, which is like sometimes it's available, sometimes it's not. There's no way to predict when it's going to be available, and you need all of these backup power plants for when it's not available. And it makes everything very expensive. And so as a result, the baseload generators cannot recoup their costs because they lose money in the middle of the day. And so there is no new nuclear being built anywhere that there is a regional transmission organization. Not one plant. Or natural gas. Because why? Because they can't show a return on investment, because if they operate, they're going to lose money.
It's a bad proposal.
With all these solar guys. So the RTO areas, even Texas, which for a long time had the most efficient electricity market in the world, these places are headed for a major, major, potentially catastrophic energy shortage that Florida will be shielded from, because Florida can still, if you're a nuclear plant or a natural gas plant, you can still reach an agreement with the utility that guarantees you a rate of return on your capital investment. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? That means that electricity is going to be very expensive in Florida, but there won't be shortages, right? Because at least they're building new capacity. And so you're going to be paying, like I have a friend of mine likes to say, you're going to be paying for the same electron 5 times.
But
you're paying for it on your electricity bill. You're paying for it in the capacity market. You're paying for it when you pay, or your children pay for the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies. You're paying for it. You're getting. If you really understand your electricity bill, you will eventually vote whoever's in charge out of office. Or definitely come out against the utilities. But that's a very important. So I think again, once in a while you come across an incentive program like the rooftop solar one that you mentioned that sort of works. But I think people need to really temper their expectations of the government's ability to beat the market when it comes to innovation.
That was Dr. Mario Loyola giving us a hard look at the structural challenges facing America's energy grid, another example of how policy choices ripple through the American economy in ways we don't always see right away. Shifting gears now, we head into the residential real estate market with Dr. William Hardin III, Dean of FIU's College of Business. In this clip, Dr. Hardin reflects on what he calls the HGTV effect and challenges would-be investors to think beyond quick flips, highlighting why long-term sustainability, business modeling, and quality of life considerations are at the heart of real estate success. Here it is.
Is there something about our topic, the residential real estate market, that you think is being given an undeservedly minimal amount of attention that you'd like to maybe highlight for our audience?
Okay, when I look at the residential and I see what I'm going to say is the HGTV effect. And what you see a lot of times is simply a subcomponent of what it really takes to be in the business on a long-term basis. So, for example, let's say I can find a property, do a value-add renovation, sell that property. In essence, I'm a mini home builder or a mini developer. Okay? The question that people need to recognize is, well, can you do that every 6 months? Or can you do that for the next 3 years? So one of the issues that comes up on the residential side from an entrepreneurial standpoint is that it is labor intensive, okay? And you have to build in an ability to replicate and have a business model. So I talked with a student years ago before I moved here, and the person, because I actually at that time I ran construction management in a real estate program, and what he had built up was, in essence, a construction component that ended up creating a portfolio of investment properties, which is, you're buying a 60s ranch, you update it, you rent it, okay? And that was the business strategy, okay? And the strategy was not to sell it, but to create a portfolio, because then there was a management component associated with that, which created a business enterprise.
Additional income, right?
Additional income, and also you're paid to someone has to manage real estate. It doesn't manage itself. So you were creating that whole business services model. So sometimes when I talk about entrepreneurs on the residential side, as opposed to systemic things like access to capital, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and those, it comes down to think of it as a business services model, and what does it take to run this as a business long term? Because a piece of real estate, in another sense, it's a cash flow that benefits the investor, but for all those cash flows, there's about 30% of the overall cash flows, or maybe depending on the product, 40% that goes into just running the day-to-day operations of that. It's not all profit, but it's revenue. So then can you build in efficiency? Can you scale that? Can you run that as a consistent? So think of, if I were going to get into the real estate side, I'm going, especially on the entrepreneurial side, is how do I create that business model that I can replicate? I can get lucky.
It would be sustainable. Yeah.
I can get lucky and buy something and make $300,000, but that's not a business model unless I have a strategy to do that every 2 years. or better yet, if I can do it every week,
it has to be sustainable,
or every day,
yeah.
So a part of the thing in residential is it sustainable, and then the other component is what is the end result we're going to find related to some of the changes with the National Association of Realtors and having to do with designation as an agent, buyer agent, seller agent, because if you're in the business of real estate, that does impact you, because one of the revenue streams you have is related to the brokerage, the sales and the disposition strategy, because a lot of people are concurrently working that. So I can have an investor that it gets a return, and then I can, in essence, make money by putting the deal together, working it, and selling the property. So all those things are going to probably make it a little bit more challenging in the future, but it also comes down to some people are good at managing the process and doing that, because real estate it's a business. It's not a passive business. It's an active business. So if someone would say, I'm involved in real estate, I go, if you want passive, buy a REIT, buy a fund. But there's a lot of activity you can do if you want to be an active participant. And the question is, how much active participation do you want?
Yeah, instead of just riding the wave, you have like a real foundation that you built.
You can do it, and if you don't do it, what would it cost you to hire someone to do what you're doing? So part of your return may be simply being the service provider to the asset you own.
Yeah, facilitating
that. Well, if I had to hire a property manager or leasing agent or somebody, well, that takes X amount of the cash flow. So what is it my total return, or is it my return to an activity and then a return to an investment? But I think people are attracted to real estate because it's tangential to everything that we do, and it's somewhat tactile in that it's physical. But you really are dependent on the built environment to create a quality of life. And so if you want to have a good quality of life, you start with basically the residential side. You start with X. How do we create those parks? How do we create those interactions? How do we create those neighborhoods that people want to live in? And that's what attracts people to residential real estate.
It's quality of life driven, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, and also it can be pretty fun. You know, you're building something, you get to see it. You can trade a lot of assets online, or
there's so many resources to just.
Well, I'm talking about it. If I'm doing real estate, I can come there and I can see, man, now I poured the slab, I did A, B, or C. So there's a component of that people can see, as opposed to I'm sitting in a cubicle and I'm maybe trading millions of dollars a day or hundreds of millions of dollars a day on some financial asset. But at the end of the day, I'm still in my cubicle, and some money goes in my checking account at the end of every 2 weeks and get a bonus. But in real estate, don't ever forget there is a value, and there's something that people inherently like. We helped build that. We helped renovate that. We helped create that environment. And people don't don't want to hear that because they go, it's financial, it's this, that. No, there's a component like, hey, I built that. Hey, I did that.
It's an easy way to find fulfillment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way of fulfillment. That's exactly.
I remember one of my childhood memories is seeing how my father took an undeveloped plot of land in the Golden Beach area.
Okay.
And then over the course of years, it was becoming developed, the concrete being poured in, the trees and the bushes being cleared out, and then the foundation, and then the insides and outsides. And before you know it, there's this multi-story mansion that's aside everyone else, and families are able to go inside.
And so I think part of that's the attraction of real estate. There's that physical component to it, and it's visual, and also it's kind of it's still a do business, okay? Doing computer coding and this or that, that's great, but that's not the same as going back and seeing, well, we built this and now the trees are full scale. Just look at this campus here. Okay, we have a master plan on this campus. We have trees here that are now 40, 50 years old. We have trees that are older that we actually brought here that were 20-year-old trees. there was a plan to create the canopy that we have at FIU that would surprise many people. But there was a plan, and it's a physical quality of life component that people thought about and said, this is a long-lived asset, so we're going to bring this canopy in that you would never expect to find here because, it's Miami, it's urban, and it's a relatively new school.
What are these giant African palms doing, all
I-
in Florida?
Yeah. So I think that's part of it too. Is you can go back and see what's done. I think we also have a better understanding of how we work in a resilient environment. We have a better understanding for the negative side of development with regard to habitat destruction. I think people are much better than they ever were in the past, and that makes it some exciting stuff too, which in the end, though, comes back down to the same thing as quality of life. What is the quality of life that you want? I've been all over the world. I've been in China numerous times, and it's a fascinating place if you want to look at the built environment. But there's also kind of the beauty of being in a place that has minimal built environment. Like
See the
Shark
juxtaposition.
Valley,
Sure.
going out there and checking it out. So so those are things that we have to there are certain trade-offs that we have to make as a society. But when you cut through all that, I'm going to go back and finally just say we need to make sure that everyone has access to sufficient quality housing in this country, and it shouldn't be that hard to figure out. I'm always amazed at how difficult it seems to be, but I'm going, how much does it really cost to build X? How does it? I have people who work in the affordable housing space. I know people who work all over that space, but for whatever reason, we can't seem to put it together.
That last excerpt was the podcast's discussion with Dr. William Hardin III, the Dean of FIU's College of Business. Next up are the highlights for episode 5 of the podcast, where Professor Marcus Kerbel recounts his journey as a Cuban immigrant during Operation Pedro Pan and eventually settling in Miami. His discussion paints a vivid picture of how Miami developed from somewhat humble beginnings in the 1960s into the 80s, 90s, and beyond as it became an international financial nexus.
Could you tell us, where you came from and how you ended up in South Florida, Miami?
Okay, I was born in Cuba, and I had a pretty nice, let's say, childhood and beginning of my adolescence until Castro came to power in 1959, and then I was beginning my adolescent years, and then by 1961 there was an exodus of Cubans out of the islands, and there was an operation called Pedro Pan, or Peter Pan, depending, we call it in Miami Pedro Pan, in Cuba they call it Peter Pan, where 14,000 plus kids came out of the island alone without their parents and were sent either to different places. Many stayed in Miami in camps, or they stayed with relatives, or they stayed with friends. I was sent to Los Angeles to foster homes, and I was there for about a year, and about 13, 14 months until my uncles arrived. They claimed me. And then my parents arrived, my brother arrived, then we resettled in Atlanta. That's where I finished high school at Henry Grady High. And then I did my bachelor's and master's degree at Georgia State University while I was working for an accounting office.
Amazing.
All right. Well, one of the first questions in terms of the historical aspect of our theme today, which is residential housing, we'd like to know if you could share with us a little bit of insight into the role of federal housing agencies in shaping mortgage lending practices back in after the FDR administration and a little further on.
Okay, since I'm a baby boomer, I would say that I started realizing that the policy of the United States government was for everyone to have their own most important asset, which is their home. And a lot of these plans started right after World War II, when all these veterans started coming back to their homes. And I think it was an excellent policy because it allowed individuals to buy a home and be able to grow their families in it and build equity while they were paying down their mortgages. And that allowed for an expansion of the cities, because now many of these homes were started to be built in suburban areas where the land was cheaper and where there was more space to be able to grow the families and be able to have backyards and to have pools and all these amenities that you can have in a home today.
And building off of that, I guess one of the things that we're interested in is if you could speak on the earliest developments in the 1970s that really led to the modern Miami that we see today.
Okay, what we have to understand is that prior to 1961, Miami was considered the gateway to heaven or to hell, depending on the type of people that came down, right? We have great people. We also have some names that history has, pin on us. But most people that would used to come to Miami, they came to Miami on vacation or came for retirement. And the summer was basically kind of most hotels would, you could get a lot of good rates in the summertime because it was kind of empty. So, but we got to remember the migrations. The first one is the Cuban. That started right after Castro started, after Bay of Pigs in 1961. So a lot of the Cubans started leaving, and where was the first stop was Miami, and they preferred to remain here, even though many went to New York and some went to Puerto Rico, went to other countries. But Miami was a primary place. Among those groups of individuals who were in the banking industry in Cuba, and those individuals realized that one way to start growing Miami was through the banking sector. How do you do that? Well, some of these countries' governments were beginning to turn left, and there were beginning to be concerns that there would be the communism that was starting in Cuba was going to spread throughout the hemisphere. So some of these bankers, and I later on, joined the club. We traveled to these countries and tell these people, hey, we know you love your country, but prepare in case something happens. Don't let it happen to you. What happened to the Cubans? They got caught very quickly, totally unexpected, and they had no money abroad, and they had to come. They lost everything because everything has been nationalized, confiscated, and they had to come penniless and start from scratch in the United States. So we went through that, and that's how Miami started growing. In the 60s, there were few banks here. Most of these banks now don't exist anymore. They were sold or they were merged. But then something interesting happened that these individuals who were coming first on vacation, these Latin Americans, started bringing in the money. Then they started visiting more frequently, and they started buying condos, or they're buying homes. And then we see how some of them started sending their children to colleges in the area. So this is all the growth. And at that time, many of the savings and loans that existed at that time were able to finance many of these condos for many of these families. And, more and more people came. And then later on, I'm thinking right after one area that we started seeing more Europeans coming in was after 2000 when the euro came out, was launched. And then the euro one time hit about $1.60 to the dollar. And they came out about 117 in 2000, and then it went up to about 160. So a lot of these Europeans found a way to come to Miami and also start investing. So we have Italians, we had Germans, we have and now it's interesting how you go to Miami, the different areas, the different enclaves that you find.
Right, sort of.
So if you start from, for example, from the south of around FIU, what do you find? Well, you had a group of Nicaraguans that are here across the street in Sweetwater. This was a Nicaraguan enclave after Somoza was deposed and the Ortega regime, came in, and Sandinistas came in. And then you have now Doral, which is known as now Dorazuela, because the enclave of Venezuelans. And you have an enclave of Colombians in Key Biscayne. And you have an enclave of, you go to North Dade, the areas of Sunny Isles Beach and Aventura and all that, you'll find several languages that are spoken there. You go to the Aventura Shopping Center, and you'll hear Spanish, you'll hear English. English you probably hear the least. You'll hear English.
There's some French too.
You hear Spanish, you hear French, you hear Russian, you hear Ukrainian, you hear Hebrew, even probably Arabic too. So it's interesting. And I remember because I was in the banking industries, and it's hard to really believe how time quickly passes. That a few days ago, it will be 30 years that the bank that I headed here in Miami, we decided to move it to Aventura. And at that time, Aventura wasn't even a city. Aventura was part of the county, and I remember going to the building that we selected to negotiate the lease with, and I went to see the prospective tenants or neighbors in the building, and I was asking for their business cards. And it was interesting how some of them said Miami, some of them North Miami Beach, mm-hmm. Some of them said just Aventura, even though Aventura was not a city yet. It was just like calling Kendall today.
Exactly.
Forward thinking.
Yeah. So it's interesting, and then the city became. That area it was unincorporated became the city of Aventura because one of the issues, if I remember correctly, the literature was that the people of Aventura complained they were giving about $13 million of taxes to the county, but they were not getting enough services for the kind of money they were paying. So that's why they decided to
separate.
The same thing happened then later on with Sunny Isles Beach.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how things were developing over time here in Miami, and so we have a mix that to me I'm very proud of the fact that I'm teaching at FIU, where not only we have a global faculty, but also that we have students from 140 countries. So and some of these students that are here, their parents but really stayed in Miami.
And that was Professor Marcus Kerbel, one of the leading professors in FIU's Department of Finance and former chair of the Board of Directors and president of the Florida International Bankers Association. Next up are some highlights for episode 6 of the podcast, where we hosted and moderated FIU's AI conference earlier this year in February. Our guests, Dr. Puyan Esmailzadeh and PhD candidate Sheng Suyang, discuss, among other things, the concept of AI alignment with human needs, as well as some tips for professionals seeking to pitch AI projects with potential sponsors, investors, and stakeholders.
We wanted to know if you could talk about the role of robotics, perhaps humanoid or other, in the evolving mid to near term?
There's a tendency to make the AI and the robot become anthropomorphism, which means make the AI technology or robot more human-like. For example, if we use the AI system, we will design the human-like avatars to make it interact with users. And also in robot, we will try to make it more like a human rather than a robot dog, right? This is based on assumption that we think the human likeness and the anthropomorphism will facilitate the interaction between human and AIs. Because when the AI and robot become more human-like, we think we are interact with a similar species. So it may decrease our concern about the threat. But interestingly, in the recent research, we think the human likeness is a two-sided sword. In the one side, when the AI and the robot looks more human-like, we will consider it more smart, more friendly, and more ethic at the same time. But meanwhile, when we put a human-like avatar or human-like robot in the workplace, in many cases, people and employee of the company will raise a very concern of a career threat. They think the AI and the robot are more like humans, so they can do many things like a human, and there's a very high probability they will replace us. This is what we already observed in our current studies. Meanwhile, in previous study in the management science, we always observe if there's a feeling of threat, or if there's a feeling of a career threat, it will greatly undermine employees' performance in the companies. So now, if you want to ask if the human luck or human role is a good thing, I would say depends. So in practice, we need to figure out what is the effect of the human likeness of the AI in more details under the different scenarios to make sure in what conditions we would better to use the human likeness design, like if we want to use the AI or robot to interact with our customers. The human likeness may looks good because it will improve the trust of our customer to the AI technologies. But meanwhile, if we want to use the AI technology as an employee in a company, try to make it less human-like to avoid the perceived threat of your employees. Yeah, this is what we get the suggestion from the current studies.
Now that we kind of had this door being opened when it comes to ethics and what's considered correct, what's considered appropriate behavior, let's kind of change the conversation to this ethics and philosophy discussion for a little bit before we eventually close and open it to the Q&A. So we have this concept in the theoretical discussions with artificial intelligence that's referred to as AI alignment. And this is kind of a subject that we've been exposed to a few times so far in this conversation. And the bottom line basically is the AI doing what people want it to, or is it doing more damage or leading to unintended consequences than not? Is that alignment taking place? So there's a few general perspectives. You have three essential camps where you have more optimistic perspective of people, and they believe that this is not a challenge that is going to be hard to solve. And then you have the more cautious perspective. They feel like that problem is actually going to be a long-term problem and we have to kind of slow down. And then the third one is going to be something somewhere in the middle. So overall, how would you two approach these perspectives? Are there strengths? Are there weaknesses to their arguments? Are there things that we could be confident about?
So overall, I don't know how the AI will influence the human beings, but I know if you want to survive in a time of error, you need to choose a right position. You need to know how to use the AI properly, and you need to go to an industry which may not that easily be replaced by the AI technologies. If you determine to be a food deliverer, your career life may be almost down. But if you are managers and know how to use the AI technology properly for your decision making, you make it, you will be a super stars in the business. I think it's a very open-ended question, but the answer is you need to know how to let the AI technologies to support your success.
Okay, so my approach is that so we can have like two different like extremes. So let's just talk about like the short term, like now. So short term, AI is tool, right? AI is a productivity tool. So you have to use AI in any fields, in any like position, in any job that you're having now. So you need to use AI, and you just need to consider it as productivity tool, something that can improve your productivity, something that can help you do things easier, faster, better, smarter, minimizing error, right? So that's the way that I'm just thinking of AI now for short term. And another thing that I always just think of whenever like people are just thinking of like automation, that AI gonna replace me or not. So the best way that you can do for yourself is that try to break down your job or your whole like your job into a smaller task, and you just see and calculate what percentage of your job task can be automated. Do it for yourself, right? And you're gonna say, okay, like 50 or 40% of my current tasks can be replaced by AI, can be done by AI in a better way. Okay, you still have that 60%. You still have that 50%. This is your this is your this is your spot to shine. You still have like 60%, 40% to use AI or other tools in order to create value, right? This is for short term, right? But definitely in future, maybe in long term, maybe long term is going to be 10 years or 20 years or whatever. So they are coming, so robots are coming. So we have like, as also he mentioned correctly, so we have delivery robots, we have robots in healthcare, we have robots in all other like fields for decision making. In that like position, in that like, for example, in long term, so maybe we're gonna just think new way of creating value, or maybe we need to create or develop some new way of work culture, because like, for example, in 10 years, right, that's another skill that you need to learn. In 10 years, you need to control people, you need to manage people KPI, you need to manage agent KPI, and you need to manage the relationship between the agent and people. These are some skills that you need to learn, right? So that's something that you need to remember also in future, that is not only human. So we have human, we have agent and human, and by the way, agent and agent. Imagine we have robots and robots. So you're gonna manage. You're gonna understand how to manage this. So these are all the challenges that we have in future. That's my perspective for future. We're gonna define new way of creating value.
Yeah. So moving on a little bit with the nuanced perspective that you sort of encouraged us to take, where we should look at the responsibilities that we have in our roles and kind of determine, say, 60% of this, will be replaced by AI. There's a camp of people called sort of the existential risk thinkers, and these advocates say that we should maybe, until we fully understand the nature of the replacement that AI will have, that we should maybe slow development until that understanding is really all there. Could you speak on that?
So something about because I'm kind of biased. I'm the AI optimist. So I'm very optimist about AI. So that's all the answer that I have is about that. But any technology, as I mentioned, anything, any tool, any technology can be positive or negative, right? This is a very general thing that we cannot say this is good for sure and this is bad for sure. And another thing, this is my personal belief, so is that, are you afraid of algorithm? Are you afraid of those, like, for example, those like flowchart or algorithm that try to solve the problem? Or are you afraid of the bad users? Are you afraid of human, or are you afraid of those like robots, right? So what is my question is that my debate is that, what is the source of learning for those AI? Is it from us, right? Is it from us? The way that feed them, right? This is the way that we feed them. We feed them with our training, with our data, that I mentioned, is about bias one dimension. So that's what I'm always, this is my always like thinking that, are you afraid of people who gonna use it in a wrong way, or who gonna train it in a wrong or malicious way, or are you afraid of those algorithms, right? That's the main question. So to be or not to be, right? So that's the question that you need to answer. So I'm very I'm afraid of people instead of I'm afraid of those algorithms. I'm afraid of, like, for example, the situation that, like, for example, like 20% or 10% of like people in the world have access to like, for example, AI, and the rest doesn't have anything, right? So, and why it is very dangerous, because those people can feed AI and can tell AI whatever they want, and you are only the users. You just need to use those pre-built model. That's the question.
And that was Dr. Puyan Esmailzadeh and PhD candidate Sheng Suyang, both with FIU's College of Business Information Systems Management Department and Business Analytics programs. Next up are highlights for episode 7 of the podcast, where we speak individually with Dr. Zadeh as he explores the role of AI and robotics in healthcare, as well as helps contextualize AI's disruptive and revolutionary role in the global landscape.
Were there any particular breakthroughs or innovations, let's say around the early 2010s, that maybe during your research and studies and projects, you were able to begin to apply them, or they could have been generally applied?
Okay. So if you just let me, so let's just talk about technology progress because you just talk about like history. So I'm gonna start with this, then I'm gonna answer your question because this can answer your question alone. So in like around like 1999, 1998, like early 2000s, so we often heard the phrase that is said like, there's a website for that, right? There's a website for that. So for every like needs, so that's the rise of .com era, right? Around like 2010, so like we have another phrase that was very famous. There's an app for that, right? There's an app for everything you want, for all the tasks. For example, like there's an app for losing weight. There's an app for tracking your sleep. There's an app for budgeting and also managing your finance. There's an app for ordering food. There's an app for this, that, right? So that's gonna be the hype for that time. So then today, the popular saying is that there's an AI for that, right? There's an AI for that. Why it is very important? Because this is important after the ChatGPT moment that we have around like 3 years ago. So ChatGPT, that's the rapid rise of large language model and also generative AI. And these days, so everyone can use like some large language model, conversational AI or generative AI, whatever you're gonna call it, in order to just use it for image generation, for video creation, for song generation, for customer service, for coding assistant, for data analytics. So that's one of the biggest changes that we have exactly after the ChatGPT like launch around like 3 years ago. So, but the post-ChatGPT era, like these days, that sparked the belief that AI can perform nearly all different types of cognitive tasks, from writing a novel or to design the very good website. And so that's why there is an AI for that. But after that, so the next trend is what? The next trend is that there's an agent for that, right? There's an agent for that. For all task or purpose that you have in your mind, there's an agent. So this is an emerging shift that we're gonna have in AI. But what is an AI agent? AI agent is gonna be like an autonomous system that is capable of receiving in this environment perception and making decision and taking actions to achieve some specific goals with minimal human intervention. That's the key. That's the goal, right? So what is the key idea here? The key idea here is that the agent can independently on your behalf, beyond just recommending, it can just like execute some task that you define, like buying the ticket, like adjusting your plans, or even like handling a refund if like prices drop. So this is something that we have is as a kind of agentic. So we call it agentic AI. It's not even like talking about large language models. So because we already like passed that, so this is the agentic AI. So that's going to be another one. But soon, what is the next like popular saying? The next one is that there will be an AGI for everything. So AGI is the artificial something that can just help you with all different like human tasks. It's not only for a specific task that you define, for everything in general intelligence. So, but when we're gonna get it, so some people say it's gonna be in like 10 years, it's gonna be in 20 years. Some people say it's gonna be like longer, or some people just think that is better to never reach that AGI because it can just control everything and replace humans and blah, blah, blah. So this is kind of like progress that we have. So the one that you asked about like the shift of large language model, I believe we already passed that. So it's not all about generative AI. Now is about agentic AI. So we are thinking of agentic. Like many companies these days are trying to recruit agents. They want to have agent for customer service. They want to have agent for finance. and they want to have like multiple agents that working together instead of have like, for example, different AI. So they want to just moving to agentic AI. So that's going to be the next shift.
That was Dr. Zadeh breaking down the evolution of AI from its early days of apps and simple automation to today's surge of large language models and what he calls the rise of agentic AI. Zadeh explains how we're quickly moving beyond just having an AI for every task to developing autonomous agents that can actively make decisions and carry out complex actions on our behalf. This is a shift that could redefine how businesses and consumers interact with technology in the years to come. To close out this compilation, we turn again to Dr. Lina Bouillard, the director of FIU's MBA in Business Analytics program. In this segment, she explains how tools like Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG, are helping smaller firms customize AI to serve their specific business needs, leveling the playing field against firms with greater resources and scale. There's this concept referred to as AI entrenchment, where just a handful of big tech firms, they can enjoy sort of almost a global dominance, so to speak, and it makes competition fairly impossible for the startups. And I know you have a lot of experience in the startup world. Could you try to debunk that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So we see the larger companies building these models, the OpenAI and the Google and the Amazon building these models. But we see today a lot of startups using these models because we can customize them. There is this new technology called RAG, RAG, or GraphRag or Neo4j. What these tools or what these methods allow us to do is to train those large language models on business data. So these chatbots are no longer generic, giving answers to everyone from a very generic perspective, but they're mainly trained on the business data. So when we ask questions or when the customer is interacting with that chatbot, the chatbot is answering questions based on the data from the business. So if, for example, we are selling flowers and the customer is asking about a specific flower, the traditional ChatGPT would say, okay, these flowers are available in the market. But for our purposes, if it's training on our business data, it could say, oh, we don't have this type of flower, we have this one, or we will get this type of flower in a week. So it provides answers and responses that are specific to the business. And this is how smaller businesses are using the AI today. And also, I have been to different countries. I was in Thailand for a conference in December, and I was also in Europe right after that. And what I hear from the experts is every country is building their own large language models. And we see France, for example, they just released their large language model, which seems to be very effective. So we're going to see a lot of competition moving forward from other countries, but also we're going to see the smaller businesses finding a way to leverage the AI to their own benefit.
That wraps up this highlight episode of the Panther Business Briefing. Throughout this 6-month stretch, we've explored a wide spectrum of issues and industries, each one connected by a focus on real-world impact and forward-looking insight. We chose topics that hit home for everyday Americans, questions like what's really driving gas prices, what's happening with housing costs, and how artificial intelligence is reshaping the way we live and work. To bring it all into focus, the 3 core topics that we covered throughout the fall semester and spring semester were oil and gas in the broader energy market, then residential housing in the United States, and finally, in the spring semester, we concluded our 3rd series of artificial intelligence. We're grateful for all of our guests for trusting us to dig deep into these subjects with real depth. Stay tuned for the final episode to include the current hosts, where Baran and I take a step back to reflect on the biggest takeaways and what this whole project has taught us.